Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Weltwoche on the Road Free Speech Summit, the summit of free speech and discourse. Tonight, featuring Stephen K. Bannon, the former chief advisor to the President of the United States of America and the architect behind Donald Trump's surprising electoral success. We are thrilled to welcome you to this sold-out event in Halle 622 and would like to thank you for the patience at the security checkpoints. Please be advised that audio, photo, and video recordings are strictly prohibited for copyright reasons. And now, please welcome tonight's host, the publisher and editor-in-chief of Weltwoche, Roger Köppel.
Hi. Wow. Wow, thank you very much. Woo, I'm impressed. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear friends, I'm really overwhelmed by your presence and honored. That's a great thing here in Zurich at the Weltwoche on the Road Free Speech Summit. Free Speech Summit. And I can promise you, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 80 media in the room, 1,500 people, and I promise you this is going to be really the Free Speech Summit, some kind of probably the rock and roll of free speech in this nice environment. When I first heard of Steve Bannon, when I read the first article, I read, this is the devil. This is the Grim Reaper. This is Mephistopheles, Mephisto, as you all know, Goethe, Faust, the incarnation of evil. This is Lord Voldemort. And I remember very well, I had a discussion with Urs Gehriger. He's the head of our Foreign Affairs Department. And he said to me, I have to meet the devil. We have to interview the devil. If the devil really exists, we have to meet him. We have to talk with him. We have to make our own judgment, see with our own eyes. And then Urs Gehriger, he started to work his whatever off to get in touch with Steve Bannon. He was like stalking him in the United States, and finally he got his interview, they got in contact, and we could arrange this great evening tonight. Thank you very much for coming, and first of all, give a warm hand to Urs Gehriger, who made this all possible tonight. Thank you. Well, finally, I also met Steve Bannon during the last days, and I can tell you, sorry Steve, he's not the devil. He's not the devil. He's interesting. And I was impressed, I confess here. I was impressed by our discussions. We agreed on some things, we disagreed on other things, but I was impressed by the broad variety of topics he had in his repertoire. We talked, for example, about Sean Penn, the left-wing actor. Did you know that Steve Bannon was the executive producer of the directorial debut of Sean Penn in 1991? So we talked about Hollywood. Then we talked about Harvard, the headquarters of the internationalist philosophy that Steve is now fighting against. He has a degree from Harvard. We talked about Goldman Sachs, which is like the highest knight order of banking, second only to our great Swiss banks. We talked about his 3 daughters, and 2 of them are Democrats. Well, nobody's perfect, but he's really an unconventional man, an unconventional father who raised his children even to have different opinions than he has. And die Weltwoche, and this is just to conclude, I won't make it any longer, this is what the Weltwoche is all about. We believe in the power of argument. We believe in the power of free speech. We believe in the exchange of ideas, in the critical discussion out there in the open. That's the essence of democracy. That's the essence of what it's all about. And we have great respect for people who have the courage to stand up and say their opinion, stand up against the mainstream. And I'm sure Steve Bannon deserves the respect for being one of these crucial personalities, standing up, speaking up, bringing his own opinion on the table. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's Steve Bannon, really a great pleasure and an honor that you are here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with a thundering applause the architect of the political earthquake that shook the White House, that shook the United States, that even shook the Redaktion of die Weltwoche. Please welcome with a thundering, earth-shattering applause, Mr. Steve Bannon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to go back a little bit in time, 23rd of June, 2016, London, England, or I guess the United Kingdom. It was the day of the Brexit vote. That night at about 10 o'clock, Nigel Farage, good friend of mine, conceded after he saw some early exit polls, conceded that the exit campaign had lost. Now, we called Nigel. He was at a watch party and said, Nigel, I think you're a little quick on the trigger. Why don't you wait till some of these Midland cities start coming in with big Labour vote? And sure enough, after midnight, at 12:20 in the morning the next day, Sunderland came in with a resounding victory for exit. Shortly thereafter, Newcastle fell, Sheffield, others. At 3:30 in the morning, 3:45, Nigel Farage declared victory. At, I think it was 7:30, 6:30, Peter Mandelson, said it was the worst day in British history post-war. David Cameron called Buckingham Palace, I think at 7:30, said he was going to resign. At 8:30, he's in front of Downing Street, resigning as Prime Minister. Nigel Farage went out to see the cameras, I think at about 8:30, 9 o'clock. And there he said, if it hadn't have been for Breitbart London, a site we had set up a couple of years before, this victory wouldn't have happened. And the reason was Breitbart provided a platform for free people to exchange ideas, particularly about the campaign to leave the EU. At the end of that press conference, kind of impromptu, the crowd around Nigel got together and sang Jerusalem. Now, the reason we had a Breitbart London, and I think one of the reasons, as he told BBC, one of the small reasons for Brexit, is we had set up a news operation and a platform for the British. And the reason was, many years before, I had seen something happening in Europe that was ahead of the United States. We had this Tea Party revolt. We had this Tea Party movement. We were starting to win seats in Congress. And the Tea Party movement was principally a populist revolt driven by the chief operating officers of the American family. That would be the women of the conservative movement. But I saw in England, and particularly in UKIP, a slightly more professional version of the Tea Party. So I started to go over there for the parliamentary elections in 2014, the European parliamentary elections. And I saw the anger that was starting to be built up in the British people. And so we started to also look at the continent of Europe, of what was happening in this populist revolt. And that led, eventually, to Brexit. Now, about 6 weeks after the Brexit vote, which, by the way, stunned And I got a show of hands. Is the opposition party media here tonight? Can I have a show of hands? Come on, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, guys. Okay, I know you're out there. You're among friends. About 6 weeks later, on I think it was August 13th, a horrible story came out in the New York Times about Donald Trump's campaign. I believe they said he was 16 points down. He was double digits down in every battleground state. The campaign didn't have a lot of money. Some people talked to me that morning and then talked to candidate Trump. And here we had the finest, I think, candidate that the United States, and particularly the Republican Party, had had in a long time, and the greatest public speaker since William Jennings Bryan. Now, it looked like in that weekend of August, he was headed to a catastrophic defeat. I came in as CEO. Kellyanne Conway came as campaign manager. We brought in Dave Bossie, a bunch of other people, made a pact with the Republican Party, Reince Priebus, and we turned it around. And we turned it around because we let Trump be Trump. We said, look, all this other stuff you're doing, just focus on three things. Number one, we're going to stop massive illegal immigration and limit legal immigration to get our sovereignty back and to protect our workers. Number two, we're going to bring back manufacturing jobs to the United States. And number three, we're going to get out of these pointless foreign wars that we're fighting all over the globe, particularly in the Middle East, Central Asia. Everything else will fall in those verticals. And we're going to compare and contrast you, Donald Trump, to Hillary Clinton. She's the guardian of a corrupt and incompetent global elite. As I told candidate Trump at the time, don't worry about being 16 down. Don't worry about double digits down in all these battleground states. Don't worry about it. Those numbers aren't relevant. We got 85 days. We got plenty of time. Only two numbers count. 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 still felt the country was on the wrong track, that President Obama had not been the agent of change they had hoped for. But the most important number, done by Pat Cadell, was that 75% of the American people believed that the United States was in decline. And that when you looked at the crosstabs, the working class and lower middle class refused to accept that. They were looking for someone to make America great again. That person, that instrument, that candidate, that weapon was Donald Trump. He was an armor-piercing shell against a permanent political class represented by the Clintons. A permanent political class that has 7 of the 9 richest counties in the United States surround Washington, D.C. That for the first time since the invention of the silicon chip, the per capita income in those counties is greater than in Silicon Valley, which has been the greatest generator of wealth in mankind's history. His assault on the permanent political class was relentless, day in and day out. All we did was put him in big venues and let him speak to the common man and woman. He could connect, and he did connect like nobody else. On the morning of September 29th, on the Morning Joe show, they brought out that was 6 weeks later, they brought out the pollster for the Des Moines Register, who does the polling for Bloomberg. We were within the margin of error of being up by 2 points. He had closed a 14, 15, 16-point gaps in 7 weeks because people started to see him and started to think they could give permission to vote for him. Now, a lot happened, the Billy Bush thing, other things. But as I continued to tell him, even in the darkest times, to 100% metaphysical certitude, you will win if you just stick to the plan. Because people want their country back. People want America to be great again. And they will sacrifice anything for you to do that. Just like on the evening of the 23rd of June, or the early morning of the 24th of June, when the mainstream media was in such shock that Nigel Farage had led a shaggy band of protest folks to take the United Kingdom out of the EU, such that CNN had a guy on that night that called him Nigel Farage, The mainstream media was absolutely shocked at Donald Trump's victory. The first exit polls that came out at 5 o'clock that evening showed us tied in Ohio, tied in Iowa, and getting blown out everywhere else. It looked like it was going to be a historic defeat. And quite frankly, for a guy that said from day one that you have 100% metaphysical certitude to win, it was a gut check. But after about 30 seconds, we collected ourselves. Jared and I called the candidate. He said, look, we left it all on the field. We did everything we could possibly do. Let's see how it plays out. Later that night, the second exit polls came in. They weren't that much better. The Detroit Free Press, in fact, called Michigan for Hillary Clinton, I think at like 9 o'clock. It looked like it could be a potential blowout. But things started to change. Ohio fell. North Carolina fell. Florida fell. Iowa fell. And at 12:15 on the morning of November 9th, for the first time in their history, the Detroit Free Press reversed their call for Hillary Clinton and said, too close to call. That's when we knew Donald Trump was the president-elect of the United States. Now, it took a couple more hours for things to come through, but that victory completely caught the political class and its mainstream media propaganda arm completely by surprise, complete shock. And they've been trying to repudiate that election from that very moment, or what I call the nullification project, to nullify that election. Now, a year and a half after Brexit, there hasn't been a lot of progress. And that's because the permanent political class in Brussels and the party at Davos don't want the United Kingdom to leave. They want to reverse the mandate of the British people. You can see President Trump, every day he struggles with what we call the swamp. That's a permanent political class of consultants and lobbyists and donors and multinational corporations and big banks and their political running dogs in both political parties. And you've seen the struggle that President Trump has had in fighting the swamp. Now, we've had more victories than defeats, and some of the things that had to be compromised, like the tax plan and the spending plan. But you've seen the permanent political class come out, including the Republican Party, as he's put forward his trade plan. Remember, trade and illegal immigration and immigration were the two that we ran on. Trade was number 100 when Sessions and I started thinking about this back in 2013. And we were going to make that the second biggest issue, because we said free trade is a radical idea when you're up against mercantilist trading partners. And that illegal immigration and legal immigration is just there to suppress the wages of workers. Trade and illegal immigration are two sides of the same coin, to suppress the wages of workers. That's what elected. By the way, what elected Donald Trump is very simple. Forget, Clinton's had billions of dollars. They had the greatest guys you cut on TV every morning. They had the smartest analysts, the best pollsters, all of this. But they lost, they played the identity politics game. And they forgot the jobs and careers game. It was working class Democrats and people who had never voted before, and working class Republicans in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa that elected Donald Trump. Now cut to 2018. Look what happened the other day in Italy. Once again, an anti-establishment vote. And the media, once again, completely gobsmacked. How did this happen? How did we not catch it? Look at what happened. Particularly as they misread what happened in France and other places, is that this populist surge is over. It's not over. It's just beginning. The tide of history is on our side. We're not going to win every election. And you can even tell when you win an election in Brexit and when you win an election in November of 2016, they're not going to wave a magic wand over you and say, oh, it's great, here's the keys, do what you want to do. They're not going to do that. If you want your freedom, if you want your prosperity, you're going to have to go and take it. We're going to have to win election after election after election until they finally say, no more. And so look at what's happened in Poland, in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in Austria, even in France and Germany. Look at AfD. Look at Front National. These are not always victories, but the momentum in the movement continually goes. And now you're beginning to see a symbiotic relationship that one can feed off the other with messaging. That's why Italy happened. Look at Italy. Look at the crosstabs. 2/3 of the Italian people voted. It was an anti-establishment vote. They're just saying, we can't do this anymore. We're not going to do this anymore. This migrant issue is not solvable by working class people in Italy. The problems of sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa have to be sorted out in sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. It can't be sorted out. And this is not making any comment about the migrants are coming up, okay? It's simply that the working class people in these countries can't solve this. And particularly when the game changes and borders close, it becomes a holding pin. But that's what the Central Powers want. What they want is for the working class and middle class people to have to solve the problems. And they don't give you a fare thee well about how it's done. That's what the populist revolt's about. Now, the reason I came here to Switzerland to do this kind of first public address in Europe there's two reasons. One, it kind of started here. In 1992, you're a lesson for the world. Dr. Blocher stood up, one man alone, against the establishment. He's Trump before Trump. He stood up against the Swiss establishment, against the European establishment, against the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal. They vilified him. They tried to destroy him. And he stood up for one simple cause. We are going to have a sovereign country. Your prosperity, the Swiss franc staying off the euro, and what he did in not joining the EU against all odds to win that referendum and to take the abuse he took, your freedom and your prosperity is because of that. And that's why you're a beacon to the world. Because it shows what a free man and free women can do. That's the inspiration. Now, this populist movement, by the way, it takes every different shape in every different country, as it should, right? It's going to be different in Hungary, and different in Poland, and different in the Czech Republic, and different in France and Germany and UKIP, in the United States of America. It's got different characteristics, and one is about getting jobs back for people and providing income for people and making sure that, you know, if a mother wants to stay at home, there are jobs out there that she does not have to work, that we can start to rebuild families and have stable societies and civic associations. So it's all of those issues you see today, the migrant issue and the jobs issue. But there's something else that's very deep and below the surface that is going to come up, and it's going to drive this populist nationalist movement for the coming, I think, years and decades. And it's the second reason I wanted to come and do it in Switzerland, and particularly in Zurich. I want to introduce my agent. The populist nationalist movement, the driving force. But there's two other forces converging that are going to take it to the next level. And quite frankly, get more compatriots and more cadres to join the vanguard that's in Italy and in Switzerland and in Germany and France, all over Europe and the United States. Think about it for a second. Central banks are in the business of debasing your currency. Central governments are in the business of debasing your citizenship. The central technology conglomerates are in the business of debasing your own personal sovereignty and your own data, your own information, what you generate. And that's the convergence of forces that you're going to see. You're going to see a revived and strong populist, anti-establishment movement in all these countries. No matter if we lose some elections, you're going to see the momentum build. At the same time, you're going to see what is called the cryptocurrency or blockchain, which is the very heart of it in Switzerland. That new currency is going to empower this movement, empower companies, empower governments to get away from the central banks that debase your currency and make you slave wages, keep you on the spinning wheel of slaves to debt, and that kill any type of thrift or any type of efficiency or any type of productivity you might have. Just like a central government is in the business of debasing your citizenship. When I was at Harvard Business School, the theology that I was taught and ingrained, high church capitalism, in the early 1980s was the maximization of shareholder value. The maximization of shareholder value. The maximization of shareholder value. It is a mantra that is drilled into you. Don't worry about the stakeholders, don't worry about anything. Maximization of shareholder value. The populist movement is based upon the maximization of your citizenship value. The third leg of this is about data. Think about it. Every day you're generating intellectual property, information, data. And the way the system is today is completely upside down. Your data, your information, your intellectual property, the digital meaning of yourself is taken totally for free. That's why you have Facebook and Google and Amazon and all this. The value of those companies is in your information. It's extracted from you. It's mined for you for free. And then used behind the cloud of secrecy and algorithms to basically enslave you. Between the currency, the citizenship, and your data, you're just serfs. It's a new serfdom. And the way you break that is with a political movement that believes in subsidiarity and pushes the rights back to the people. Now, every place can't run like Switzerland. Direct democracy is extraordinary how you do it. Your system of cantons and how you've governed yourself is extraordinary. I don't know if in modern large countries that can be done. Maybe later on with the internet, maybe. But what can be done in a representative democracy is that people can get engaged, people can have a difference, people can make a difference. And with cryptocurrency and the convergence of that force, and you're going to see that in the next few years, where we take power back from the central banks. By the way, the central bank that's put in 4 undemocratic governments in Italy in the last 7 years? Once you take control of your data, once you take control of your currency, and once you take control of your citizenship, that's where we're going to have true freedom. Now, I would love to be able to say that this revolution is going to happen with nothing else going on. There's 2 things I want to mention before we turn it over to questions. One, there's another revolutionary movement that is starting at the same time. And I'm not here to opine whether it's right or wrong. I'm not here to opine whether it's good or bad, because I don't know. But I can see its revolutionary force. And that's what I refer to as the Time's Up movement. If you saw the Oscars the other night, or if you saw the Golden Globes, you've seen what's happening, there's a motivation. You saw what happened in Virginia and in Alabama. You're starting to see an empowered grassroots on the left by what's called now, not the Me Too, but the Time's Up movement. It is a movement that I think focuses on the power dynamics of society. And it asks some deep and searching questions, questions that are going to have to be answered. As I look at it, the populist nationalist movement is equated, I think, to the American Revolution, where it talks about where sovereignty lays and who makes the decisions about sovereignty. Is it an imperial power, or is it the colonial people? The Time's Up movement, and this is, I'm not opining about its justice or its rightness or wrongness, I'm just studying it. But I equate it to the French Revolution, a complete turning upside down of society in the structure of society. And time will tell, but I will tell you, in every country, starting in the United States and starting in the midterm elections of 2018, these two forces are going to collide. And we're going to see who wins and who loses. At the same time, besides the Time's Up movement, which I think is a very deep philosophical and obviously a deep grassroots movement, we're going to go through, I think, a period like the 1930s. Now, it doesn't have to end like that. And when I say the 1930s, I don't mean the populist movements. What I mean is I think you're going to start to see different power dynamics in the world. Number one, and the most important, is the rise of China. And the people that are going to feel the rise of China the most is Europe. Brexit and 2016 Trump election are inextricably linked. And I argue they're linked because of China. Deporting Chinese overcapacity and deflation gutted the Midwest heartland, industrial heartland of our country. And also the Midland of England. Although it came through Germany and other places, it's still the excess capacity of China's industrial might and the exporting of deflation. The rise of China is unprecedented in human history, and it is accelerated by American and global elites that not just allowed it to happen, but accelerated it to happen. And now, 20 or 25 years into it, they tell us, hey, guess what? We were wrong. As China got more powerful, as China got more prosperous, it didn't become more liberal, it didn't become more democratic, it didn't become more free, and it didn't become more free market capitalist. It's the regime, not the Chinese people, but the regime is a totalitarian state, a mercantilist totalitarian state. And that's what makes free trade with them a radical idea that you can only lose on. Made in China 2025, the 5G rollout, One Belt, One Road, the conversion of the RMB into petrodollars, their advances in fintech, the march of China, the President Xi proclaiming himself emperor or president for life. This shows a geopolitical expansion that the West is going to have to answer. And we can answer it far short of war. But it's got to be information warfare, and economic warfare has to be engaged. Because that is what's happening today. No matter what your elites tell you, that's the reality. And that's, I think, you're seeing President Trump every day try to engage. And I realize everybody in this room is not going to be happy about his steel tariffs. But I think you will be when we do the Intellectual Property 301, where we finally confront China and the Chinese regime with what they've done with forced technology transfer and taking the innovation of the West, not just the United States, but the West. That's all to come. Before I turn it over to questions, just want to say one thing. If I had the choice to be governed, by the first 100 people that came in here tonight, or the first 100 people who wore a red ball cap and came to a Trump rally, or the first 100 Davos men that went to the World Economic Forum, or the first 100 partners at Goldman Sachs that came in. I would take you guys. Thank you very much.
If you want to stand on this podium, you want to stay on this or on this?
You want this one?
No, it's okay. Well, thank you very much, Steve. Thanks a lot for your presentation. And as you have seen, there was really a warm welcome, a lot of applause. So let me start here with the very tough questions.
It was warm. It's not a barn rally in Alabama, though.
Okay. So let me start here we're an unconventional newspaper. That means we're a bit disturbing the atmosphere. Let me start with the tough questions. I said you are not the devil. That's correct. But there are people who call you a white supremacist and a racist. What do you say?
So here's the thing. And for the people, if any of the protesters outside, I have protesters everywhere I go. By the way, it's totally their right to protest. That's what makes us so strong. Remember, in this whole thing with China, they talk about this Thucydides trap, the declining power and the rising power, the declining power of Athens and the rising power of Sparta. Or I guess it's actually the power of Sparta versus Athens. I'd rather be Athens. I'd rather have free men and free women. When they call me a white supremacist or white nationalist, and here's the first person that did it, was Hillary Clinton. The day after I was named, I'm going in our war room, and you see up on TV, she comes off the beach a couple of days later. It's white supremacists, it's white nationalists, it's this and that, misogynist, xenophobe, everything. And I sat there with the team, and I said, if she runs on that and we run on our issues, she's going to lose by a landslide. Identity politics can't win. Jobs and a growing economy win. I've got 5,000 hours or something of radio, all the Breitbart stuff. Show me once a racist statement. I came from an integrated neighborhood. I come from a blue-collar family before I went in the Navy. When our neighborhood integrated, my parents didn't run. We stayed. Our house is still there today, 60 or 70 years later. Because my parents knew that an integrated neighborhood was a good thing and a solid thing. It would make us better people. If you notice, most of the people that called me this are limousine liberals, right? And by the way, I wear their hate as a badge of pride. I wear it as a badge of honor. So by the way, remember, when they call you racist, when they call you a nativist, when they call you a xenophobe, when they call you all that, you're over the target. Just let the bombs go.
Well, let's first talk a bit of your experience in the White House. And here again, a bit the critical question. Are you and Donald Trump at the moment actually on speaking terms? Or are your lawyers on speaking terms?
I'm on listening terms. Look, if you go back to the Republican primary and you look at those 16 candidates who ran against then candidate Trump, that was the flower of a generation. That was a flower of the Heritage Foundation and Cato and AEI and the Kochs and Paul Singer and all the big donors with Chris Christie and Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Lindsey Graham, John Kasich, 16, Rick Perry, every vertical from neocon to limited government conservative to libertarian to Christian right. Let's throw Rick Santorum in there, right? Mike Huckabee. Trump went through them, and by the way, that's the best field ever. Carly Fiorina, a chairman and CEO of a major company, the best field we ever had. He went through that field like a scythe through grass. Why? He knew how to connect with people. If all 16 combined had run against Hillary Clinton, in combination, they would have lost. He's an armor-piercing shell. To run against the Clinton mafia, I was proud to have worked on Clinton Cash with Peter Schweitzer and then did the film Clinton Cash. The Clintons are the most corrupt politicians we've ever had.
Okay, I see, Steve.
Hang on.
But the question actually was about you and Donald Trump, not about you and the Clintons.
I'm getting there.
But he's a really gifted American politician. I mean, he knows how to evade any question, but please go on.
I know you Swiss are like that. I'm trying to give a little drama.
We're trying to be polite. We're trying to be polite here.
President Trump and I have had our ups and downs, but he's president of the United States. And he got there on his own. Myself and Kellyanne Conway and the other people, all we did was provide the opening to let Trump be Trump. And nobody else could have beaten her. Nobody else could have done that. And the courage he had, you only know 1/10 of what he had to go through, of the hate and vitriol every day. I think I'm a tough guy. No chance I could have taken that. It takes an extraordinary individual to absorb that hate every day and to continue to function at the age of 70 years old. So, do I agree with everything President Trump does? I absolutely do not. Do I think he is a great man who won a great victory and who has fought the swamp in D.C. to the best of his ability? Absolutely. And yes, our lawyers do talk.
Well, I mean, you have the ultimate experience as an insider in the White House, which probably for you, who is also a passionate outsider, a critic, must be like a trip to a foreign planet. Now tell us, Steve, how does Donald Trump govern? What is his governing style?
Well, he's an entrepreneur. You can see that, right? He's an entrepreneur, and he's what I call a field player, if you know golf or skiing. He's a field player. So it's not always the formal process it has been for other presidents, and that's fine. He's got his own house style. But if you look at the decisions he's made, and I don't agree with all of them on taxes and spending, but if you look at the decisions, they've been very prudent about how he's done this. The trade 232 that we announced, President Trump announced the other day, has been worked on since March of last year. In Afghanistan, and I didn't agree with the decision, but he took 8 months to make that decision, going through analysis, asking for backup. Don't believe the fake news about how Trump governs. He takes his time, he drills down on questions. Does he sit there and go through a 100-page analysis from McKinsey? No, he does not. Is that bad? No, it is not. For all he was mocked and ridiculed, the big button got the Koreans to talk, didn't it? My agent just moved over here. He works in very unconventional ways. But look at the results. An economy that's growing at 3%, business investment up, black unemployment all-time low, Hispanic unemployment 15-year low, the biggest tax cut we've had in a generation, and tax reordering. I don't agree with all the spending, but I understand why he did it. If you look at what we did in Riyadh, when they call him an Islamophobe, if you look at what he did in Riyadh, which was the most magnificent thing I think he did, talking about eradicating the financing of radical Islamic terror, stop the financing, start to confront Iran and Persia's, march to the sea in the Middle East. If you look at what he's done in the Northwest Pacific, you look at what he's done in the South China Sea. You see a man who is prudent, and yet the mainstream media every day makes it look like it's wild and out of control. He just governs differently, right? It's not going to change. And by the way, I was considered and called the enabler on Twitter. because I knew some battles you can win and some battles you can't. And on Twitter, he's disintermediated the opposition party media. And that's why he's on it. And by the way, I don't agree with everything on Twitter, but I understand why he uses it and why he's going to continue to use it. And I'm the recipient of some pretty good hits on Twitter.
Short question. Who is actually tweeting? Is it Trump himself, or has he a legion of tweeters?
President Trump.
It's President
Trump.
And
by the way, I don't take the tweets. Look, President Trump can call me anything but late for supper, right? I still love the guy, and he's done a great job as president, but he's on the trigger. When you see something tweeted out, it's President Trump.
And another delicate detail, we will not tell anybody, so you can be completely frank here. We're among us. The question is, if you're working together with the American president, you being a critical mind, is it possible to disagree with the president?
All the time.
Or does he think that disagreement is some kind of disloyalty, and you're fired, you will be fired? Can you disagree?
It's the exact opposite. In fact, let's talk about trade when we finally announced the 232. The most vitriolic, nastiest fights have been about trade. And they've been in the Oval Office. They've been in the Roosevelt Room. President Trump likes the competition of ideas. He likes the competition of ideas. He doesn't pit people against each other, but he likes to hear people fight for their ideas, how passionate they are, and how they bring data and analysis to that. So no, it's anything but. It's not, he's the exact opposite of dictatorial. It's everything. In fact, some of the reasons that decisions don't get made in what the media considers a timely basis, he wants to hear people, more voices. Afghanistan's a perfect example. He wanted more options. He wanted to review more data. And so when you're an advisor to him, and you see it in the White House every day. And by the way, there is definitely a nationalist side to the White House, and there's a globalist side. And I think President Trump did that for one reason. He just doesn't want one set of information to be handed to him. He likes that amount of debate.
And who are the statesmen, the politicians on the international stage he really respects? Who are his political heroes in our time? Who are the presidents, the prime ministers Donald Trump really respects?
Look, I think for different people, he has respect.
I know this question gets you into trouble, but we take your diplomatic answer, of course.
I'm thinking, no. You know, he first off, you know, the first time there's been a bilateral meeting was with Switzerland, and the first time in, what, 20 or 30 years was in Davos. I think he shows respect for the people of this country.
He did not even meet me yet. I mean, this would be an earthquake experience for him as well, right? No.
He's got enough.
No, that was just a joke.
He's got enough crazy right-wingers in America. He doesn't need.
This will all come back to you one day. This will all come back to you one day.
No, hold it. The last thing we need to do is be importing them from Switzerland. That will be a high tariff. No, he clearly, and I think he stated, he does respect President Xi. He's gotten some criticism for that. He said he respects President Putin. He respects Erdogan, right? He respects some guys that are not my pantheon, but he respects certain types. He respects Angela Merkel. He's had the meetings with Angela Merkel. I think, at least when I was there, were not just cordial. He respects her. So, like I said, it's not my ranking of order, but he's also a person that he. The one thing about Trump, I think that people don't get, is that when he's in meetings, he's one of the best listeners I've ever seen. He's not sitting there driving the conversation by talking over people. He asks questions. He wants you to defend your position. He is a great listener. And when I've seen him with world figures, he's not there dictating how the conversation. He's there to get information. He's there to see what the situation is with them. So I think he's got, he's got a rank order of who he likes and who he doesn't like, but he respects, I think, most of them.
Yeah. You were talking about the populist revolt, and you also brought up Switzerland as some kind of example. 1992, European Union, direct democracy. Now, that's true. I mean, the Swiss are very critical about elites, about governments. We are allergic against central power. But on the same time, the Swiss are very much stability-oriented. We are not revolutionaries. We are not, as you once said about yourself, Leninists. On the contrary, we are the opposite of Leninists.
You used to be revolutionaries in 1515 when you were a superpower.
Yeah, right. But, you know, yeah, but come on. I mean, we learned our lesson. We learned our lesson. Now, the question is, how does this populist revolt lead to? What do you say to people who fear that this populist revolt will set the house on fire, will create revolutionary stuff, people coming up, standing on the barricades like supernova politicians? You don't know. How do you explain this to people who want stability?
Okay, it's a false choice. It's a false choice. You're not going to have stability. The system can't continue on like it is. It just can't. What is it? The interest rates of the European bank is zero. They're lending these governments at zero. You can't continue to leverage this. Remember, the financial crisis, what triggered this populist revolt? It was 2008, the financial meltdown, right? In the 2008 financial meltdown, the greatest financial crisis in, 100 years, not caused by you, not caused by the working class or the middle class of the United States, caused by the financial elites. And who got bailed out? Did you guys get bailed out? Did the working class in the United States get bailed out? No. The financial elites had taxpayers bail them out. I think it's 150 criminal referrals from the Obama administration, the commissions that were set up about 2008, about the financial crisis, forwarded to the Justice Department. I don't believe one criminal referral has been picked up for action. Not one share of stock, not one bonus in the long term. You know why? The financial elites just cut on the spigots of liquidity. If you've owned assets in real estate in the last 10 years, it's been the greatest run you've ever had. Yet, working people, particularly in the United States, have not had a raise since 1970. It's a false choice. You're either going to have a center-right or right-wing populist revolt that tries to deconstruct the administrative state, brings entrepreneurial finance back into play, or you're going to have, on the other side, some form of socialist or state capitalist, where you see in technology today, with the taking of your data. That's the future. So is there going to be turmoil? Yes, there's going to be turmoil. I'd love to sit here and wave a magic wand and tell everybody it's going to be all nice, rosy, and stable. It ain't, okay? But that's not the choice you face. Because the other thing that you're going to get is the cultural Marxism, coupled with either state capitalism or socialism, that's going to destroy everything that you and your families have worked for generations.
Let's talk about one thing you brought up before, which is very interesting, and it's also in the news at the moment. It's protectionism. It's tariffs. It's whatever you call it, trade war. If I understand your argument correctly, and I can follow, we really have a problem that there are countries out there, like China, subsidizing their products, throwing them over the border into other countries to attack state-subsidized products, the industries of other countries. This is a misuse of fair trade or of free trade, and I understand it. But the way Donald Trump is now using tariffs, I tell you from my expertise, and I think in your heart you agree with me, protectionism on that level, on that scale, that's economic suicide, that's economic self-immolation. And you as a Harvard, I never made it to Harvard, I have deep respect for you. You as a Harvard man, you must understand that tariffs are not the solution to this questionable behavior of the Chinese. Am I right or am I right?
You're absolutely, totally, and completely wrong. This problem of state-controlled industries and mercantilist, it's more than just capacity. It's more than just the 800 million tons of Chinese overcapacity that they ship throughout the world. It's every industry. And their mercantilist policies about forced technology transfers and non-market access to the United States and to the West are the blunt instrument of tariffs the ultimate solution? President Trump just keeps saying all the time, just listen to him, reciprocity, fair trade. That's all the United States is looking for, okay? Now, is it a dramatic start to the process? Remember, President Trump understands how to drive a message. And you've already seen in the last couple of days, shifting with NAFTA. He's the ultimate deal maker. Just see it through. But he is going to deliver for that base. He is going to deliver for the working men and women in the United States. There's a study done by MIT and Harvard that shows there's a direct correlation between the factories that went to China, the jobs that followed them to China, and the opioid addiction crisis in our country. It's inextricably linked. We have destroyed, because Wall Street and corporate America thought it was a profitable idea to ship our high-value added manufacturing jobs to China. They didn't care if they were destroying civic society in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, the exact people that voted for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump does not want to start a trade war. However, he is going to get on the table, and the only way you can get it on the table, because there's been enough happy talk. There's been enough WTO meetings. There's been enough of these conferences. There's been enough strategic economic dialogue with the Chinese. It's all happy talk. Now, President Trump has pulled the trigger, and I understand it's not going to be stable. I understand that, it may cause some disruption, but folks, you have to understand, in the financial crisis that's coming, and it's coming, all the easy solutions for us were 10, 15, 20 years ago. There's no easy solutions. Watch what happens in Italy over the next couple of months. The Italian people have voted for anti-establishment parties. As those parties pull themselves together to some sort of governing majority, the issues they face on productivity, on their economy, on their debt, on their youth unemployment, on underproductivity or underemployment of their best people that come out of universities is horrific. It's all going to take tough choices. And one tough choice is tariffs.
Well, this is going to be a huge question for Switzerland because we are not the United States. We don't have the burden of being a superpower. We could never enforce our tariffs on others, so we have other means. But let me ask you two short questions.
You're a financial superpower. You're a financial superpower.
No.
You're a financial superpower.
Yeah, that's right.
You're one of the most powerful nations on earth. You're one of the most powerful nations on earth. You are. And by the way, I'm not saying that tariffs are going to work for everybody, but we can work together. President Trump is a reasonable person. Bob Lighthizer, Peter Navarro, the people around him are reasonable people. We'll reach some equilibrium. We know who our allies are, but the world's just not going to continue. The United States is not going to continue underwriting the world's security. Remember, we underwrite the post-war, rules-based international order is underwritten by the deplorables. Our defense budget's $1 trillion a year. Don't look at the $700 billion. You add it all in, it's $1 trillion a year. We're running $1 trillion deficits. And more importantly, it's going to be financed by China. More importantly, the deplorables' sons and daughters are the ones there. I come from a blue-collar family. I was a naval officer. My daughter's a West Point graduate that served with the 101st Airborne in Iraq. She's still in the Army. It's her colleagues that are in Korea. It's guys that I know and serve with that are in the South China Sea. It's the deplorables that are in the Hindu Kush Mountains today fighting. That's what the deplorables are just not going to do it anymore. They're not going to have their taxes go for that. And they're not going to have their sons and daughters over there. Now, we're not isolationists, By far, we're going to be engaged in the world, where it's in the vital national security interests of the United States. But we're certainly not going to continue to underwrite this year in and year out and have our dead come home and be upside down on trade deals with the EU, in the Gulf, and in Asia. It's just not going to work. That is the message of 2016 that Hillary Clinton and the global elite didn't get, and Donald Trump understood and manifested. And that, by the way, is not going away. No politician in the United States will be able to dismiss the deplorables in the future.
Let me throw in two very short questions, then we open up to you, ladies and gentlemen. First question. There are people, also in Switzerland, I just read an article from one organization protesting against me, against you, saying, well, Steve Bannon, he's an anti-Semite. And the thing is, I mean, you have been instrumental in the decision of the American administration to put the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, in accepting Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And probably these people don't know out there. Could you explain in very short terms, what was the reasoning behind it? Why this decision with the capital?
Well, let's go back to the anti-Semite, because that's another thing. They always want to smear you. Remember, the most outrageous smears are the one most false. I, as the executive chairman of Breitbart, launched Breitbart Jerusalem so we could have the American people see real time, real news from a terrific staff run by Aaron Klein, one of the best investigative reporters, in real time. We led in Breitbart London the plight of the Jews in Europe as they are driven out. Breitbart was a leader in reporting on the BDS movement in the United States, and more importantly, or as importantly, the effort of the cultural Marxist left to drive young Jewish kids off of the finest universities, campuses in our country. I'm proud of that. And an absolutely central promise and commitment of President Trump was to move the capital, or move our embassy to Jerusalem, and thereby recognize it for the world. And it was something we wanted to do on day one, we couldn't. But I'm so proud that that got done. So you ask Ron Dermer, ask the ambassador to the United States from Israel. There's no stronger ally. I am a Christian Zionist, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of my stand with the people of Israel and the Jewish people in Europe and the United States.
And last very short question before we open up. As I mentioned before, entering your private sphere, you have 3 daughters, right?
Yes.
What was your most important message as a father to your daughters about what is the most important thing in life?
Look, I'm very proud of the fact that they're empowered women, right? My one daughter went to West Point. She served in the darkest days, you know, in 2009, 2010 in Iraq, right? She served her country. As a parent, that's all you can ask for. And she volunteered for that. And the kids she fought with, the kids she served with, are the greatest flower of her generation. And that's why I am so high on the millennials. The millennials in the United States are actually the new greatest generation, because they've had to fight a war that they've really gotten no support from back home, except for people saying, hey, thank you for your service. But I think that the key thing is that, and hopefully this is an ultimate long-term answer to the Time's Up movement, is empowered women. And I think you see that in my daughter that went to West Point.
I mean, you know, the interesting thing is I have only one daughter, 3 years old, and I'm already not the boss anymore in my house. I imagine how it is with 3 daughters here, respect. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have the possibility to ask questions, but I can tell you I'm a very strong leader of the discussion. Please ask a question, no manifestations. Please address a question to Mr. Bannon. Could you light up the room a little bit so I can see who is lifting his arm? Probably here, we start there, in this sector over there, to the right here. Can someone with a microphone walk over? Oh, sorry, very good. And please accept we don't give the microphones away because they get taken away so often. Yes, please.
Thank you.
They never let go anymore. Please.
Mr. Bannon, you mentioned that citizenship is so important. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I think citizenship, like they say, the United States is a nation of immigrants. The United States is a nation of citizens. You know, citizens come with certain obligations to their country, right? To keep her safe, to serve your community. But it also comes with certain rights. I think one of those rights is not to have, at least in the United States, the whole point about the trade deals and illegal immigration is not to have the world unfairly compete with you for jobs. I know the reason that the capitalists want it. You have higher operating margins. But it doesn't mean it's fair. It doesn't mean it doesn't destroy civic society underneath it. So remember, economic nationalism doesn't matter what your race is, your ethnicity, your color, your religion, your gender. Doesn't matter your sexual preference. In the United States, it just means one thing, that you're a citizen of our country. And as a citizen of our country, you're not going to have to compete unfairly with the world's labor market. And I realize the Austrian School of Economics guys and the people at Heritage, their heads blow up when I say that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's reality.
Let us take a question from the, how do you say that in English, from the tribune up there, that there is no discrimination of people who are sitting higher. Could someone please give the microphone to our friends there in the rear? By the way, just to make a short introduction, these are our friends from the Efficiency Club in Zurich, Guido Perster. They also they helped to make this possible. A warm hand for our friends from Efficiency Club. Yes, please. Question.
So, dear Mr. Bannon, what was the secret of the success of Breitbart except the right-wing positions? So please tell me what made it so great in the US and Great Britain?
I think what we did was combine real-time news and content with technology. I mean, we had to have a team that kind of understood the algorithms of Facebook, the algorithms of Google, and how to actually distribute. I mean, when Andrew died, we were a relatively small site. We actually hadn't launched the new site that you see today. Andrew tragically died building the site that you see today. I think it was 4 days before we launched. So he saw it in prototype, but he actually never saw it officially launched. And I think it just, you know, I'm a capitalist, supply and demand. It clearly reached and touched people quite deeply. I mean, it's one of the reasons the New York Times did a study and I think rated it the most powerful political news site in the world by like an order of magnitude. And that's because I think for the first time, no one had ever talked about these issues of trade, or these issues of illegal immigration, or had covered Europe like Breitbart London did, and actually provided a platform for the ideas of what led to Brexit. I think it was refreshing. And by the way, you had the Daily Telegraph, you had the National Review, you had plenty of conservative sites, but nobody had really looked at it or, you know, presented the news in kind of a populist, economic nationalist way. And so I think that that's why we see the momentum, and Breitbart still got tremendous momentum. If the left, and I get approached all the time to start a left-wing Breitbart, because the left knows if they had a Breitbart on the left, Bernie Sanders probably would have beat Hillary Clinton. Remember, Breitbart in the United States, we spend 75% of our time going after the Republican establishment, 25% going after the Democrats, because you can't have real change until you change the permanent political class on the Republican side. And the Democrats don't have that. It's a pillow fight over there. You know, Rachel Maddow and Huffington Post and all these people, they got the pom-poms out for the Wall Street clique that runs the Democratic Party, and that's one of the reasons I think you haven't seen Bernie Sanders and those guys get the traction that they want. But trust me, I'm not going to start a left-wing Breitbart.
But But besides, with Goldman Sachs, you have been also an insider of the Wall Street clique, by the way. Yeah, I mean.
But let's talk about that. Yes.
No, I just wanted to mention that we have to ask further questions now. Sorry. We want to ask a woman, because in the age of the Me Too movement, there must be a woman now asking a question before I take another question of a man. Who can I give the microphone? Is there a woman here who wants to ask a critical question? Come on. I mean, she's waving obsessively. Please.
I grew up in America, so I'm American, and I left there 25 years ago. And when I look now at the country that I left, I don't recognize it anymore. I see a lot of hatred, a lot of division. And I want to know what your opinion is on that, because to me, Trump grew on hatred in a way. And how do you see that? I mean, it's so divided.
Can I see where you are? I just can't see.
I'm up here.
Oh, you're up top?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's sad to me. Thank you.
Okay. You know, I believe in a cyclical theory of history built around turnings. You know, this is not the most divided we've ever been. We had the American Revolution. We had the Civil War. We had the Great Depression and World War II. This is the great fourth turning in American history. We're going to be one thing or the other on the other side of this in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. We're either going to be the country that was bequeathed to us by the revolutionary generation and by the folks who won the Civil War and by the people that ended the Great Depression and won World War II, or we're going to be something totally different. I would love to sit there and tell you that it's all fine, but it's a time of great issues. It's a time that people, and by the way, I don't fault the left. They've got very deep convictions, and they have every right to have those convictions. And we have every right to beat them at the polls. And it's going to take, if you think it's going to get any better, it's not. If you think it's going to get any less contentious, it's not. And if that's too much for you, then you're not going to be part of this fight, and that's fine. Remember, in the Revolution, a third of the people were patriots, a third backed the Tories, and a third, as is human nature, kind of sat there and said, I want to see how this thing plays out, and I'll back the winning side.
One short follow-up question, then we take another one.
Great question, though.
Yes. Have you ever been a lefty? Have you ever been to the left as a young man, or never? You were always on the right.
No, I guess I was.
Right from the beginning.
No, I was a little, more liberal in my early, college days.
Oh, which is somehow comforting to know. Very good. Who is there? Probably there in that sector over there. Is there somebody? Yeah, here we have some. Yes, here is somebody. Please. Sorry. Yes.
Mr. Bannon, you spoke about Brexit, you spoke about Italy, you spoke about Switzerland, but you haven't spoken about the future of the European Union. I'd like to get a bit your view on what may happen in the near future.
I think you saw it in Italy the other day, right? I think Salvini came out and said, hey, I don't see how the euro survives. Whether the European Union survives or not is up to the people in these different countries. It's up to the people in Poland, people Czech Republic. The British voted. They're out. Are the Italians, will they eventually vote and exit? I have no idea. I will tell you one thing. If the people in Brussels do not start listening and making dramatic change in relation to these countries, and dramatic change is not to let 650,000 migrants come up from North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa and then have borders closed and let working class people, and particularly in southern Italy, have to deal with it and say, that's your problem, that system's not going to exist. So it's purely, look, I came over here and I realize I've been on my soapbox preaching. I came over here to learn because this revolution is the canary in the mine shaft to what happens in the United States. That's why Brexit taught me so much about the populist revolt that took place in America. That's why I spent so much time in Italy. That's why I'm spending time here. That's why I'm going to spend time in Europe and in Asia in the coming months. There's much to learn here. But one thing I can tell you, that Italian vote, 2/3 of the Italian people cast an anti-establishment vote. And it was total, complete denial by the people in Brussels until that vote was taken. So the European Central Bank and the guys in Brussels better start listening, or they're going to have a bigger revolt on their hands than they have today.
Okay, yes, sure. You have to bring in the people there as well, but very good.
Mr. Bannon, why President Trump apparently or not apparently betrayed one of the main promises of the campaign made during the campaign regarding amnesty for the so-called dreamers is going to be much more than Obama on steroids. Really, Obama on steroids is going to be God's plan. Thank you.
You're saying that the proposal he put forward gave amnesty to dreamers, and that's against what he said in the campaign? Okay, look, I didn't totally agree with his negotiating strategy, but I think if you look at it, he knew the Democratic Party would never give up on chain migration. So he wanted to show the American people and the world that he was prepared to go forward with, I think, quite a radical proposal, which was not just amnesty for the 650,000, amnesty for 1.8 million, which would have probably led to amnesty for 3 million, right? And it allowed another 5 or 6 million that were there with chain migration to come in, and full citizenship in 10 years, okay? He did that, I think, to show the world that, hey, Donald Trump, if I had run on this in the presidential primary against those 6 guys, I would have finished 7th. It's a more radical plan than Marco Rubio and these guys by far. He did that to show that the Democrats have no interest in solving DACA. They still wouldn't give him a penny for the wall, and they wouldn't back off chain migration, right? So I think I didn't totally agree with that. I would never allow it to be put forward that I was for amnesty. And I would argue to him, as others in the White House did, not to do that. He made a decision. He and Stephen Miller came up with this strategy, but it at least worked to show the world that the Democrats have no interest in the DACA folks. They have interest in what I call changing the electorate of the United States.
2 last questions. I'm sorry we cannot use this venue the whole night, but let me ask you probably on this side. I didn't have a question from this sector. Please, one question from here. Is there a, yes, please. Here, there's someone. Over there. Die haben kein Mikrofon dort. Aha, die müssen immer rüberlaufen. Okay. Sorry. Sure. Yeah, just wherever there is, they're right. Very good.
Yes, in 1 month, Hungary will hold parliament elections. And what is your opinion about the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban? He's been regarded as a black sheep in the EU Parliament because of his stance on migration.
I think Viktor Orban is like Donald Trump. They never want to talk about all the good he does. I think he's a great patriot and a great hero. I'm not a forecaster of elections, but I can tell you he's a man of conviction. And I think in today's time, authenticity and conviction goes a long way. Yeah. So I think Viktor Orban's going to be fine. And I tell you, he's a perfect example, along with President Trump, that the mainstream media, The Economist, the Financial Times of London, the Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, will never, ever say a good word about him. And that should be the #1 reason why you like him.
Okay, we have one very last question, ladies and gentlemen. Let me go into this field there, please. Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming to Switzerland and speaking. I'm very proud to hear you.
thank you, and I want to thank you guys for having me. It's been fantastic.
I've been reading Breitbart since it started. I think the real reason for the success is the information and the data that you provide in every article. And my question is, don't you really think this is a battle between freedom for the individual versus freedom for the state in a Marxist setting?
I couldn't say it better. That's what I was trying to say. The populist movement with the cryptocurrency, with your data sovereignty, is about, we're all serfs today. This is about, the road to serfdom. And it's about lifting that off, and it's about true freedom. That's what Dr. Blocher, that's why I wanted to come. That's what he showed you in 1992. You are the most free and the most prosperous nation in Europe. Because an individual who understood that took on all comers. That's the lesson of Dr. Blocher, that's the lesson of Switzerland, and that's the lesson to me of Donald Trump and what's happening in America.
Steve Bannon, thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you very much
for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
We have a little present for you. It's the first edition of the Weltwoche 1933. So thanks again. Good. We have here, you can continue to applaud. We have here the first edition of Die Weltwoche when it was founded all over 80 years ago, and Die Weltwoche was always dedicated to free speech, argument, counter-argument, open discussion. Many thanks for all of you who have been here. Many thanks to the Efficiency Club who supported this event. Many thanks to Guido Pasterer and you that you came here, that you had the patience to walk in and to go through all the procedures. Urs Gehriger who made it happen. And once again, Steve Bannon, it was a privilege, it was an honor, and it was great to make our own judgment on one of the most interesting personalities in political life right now.
Thanks for the World Week, and thank you, Zürich, for having me.
Very good. Sure. Thank you very much.